Joe Gans was born on November 25, 1874, in Baltimore, Maryland. Didn't come for much, but he knew how to fight. At just 17 years old, he stepped into the boxing ring for the first time in his hometown, and from that moment on, he never looked back. In early 1895, after knocking out Samuel Allen in just 3 rounds, Gans was instantly challenged by Allen's cornerman, Bud Brown. Gans didn't flinch. He laced up again and beat Brown over 10 hard-fought rounds. Word started spreading this young man from Baltimore wasn't someone you wanted to mess with. But boxing isn't a straight path. On March 3, 1900, Gans fought his first title bout against Frank Earn in New York City. He was doing well until a brutal eye injury forced him to stop in the 12th round. Some called it a setback. Gans saw it as unfinished business. 2 years later, he met Earn again, this time in Fort Erie, Ontario. Gans wasn't interested in dragging things out. He tore into Earn from the opening bell, landed a sharp left to the face, then crushed him with a clean right to the jaw. Earn dropped slowly, bloodied and beaten. He couldn't even try to stand before the count finished. Just like that, Gans became the world lightweight champion, the first African-American born in the U.S. to ever win a world boxing title. He wasn't done. On January 6, 1902, he faced former welterweight champ Eddie Connolly in Philadelphia. Connolly came to hold and survive, not to fight. He tried butting, wrestling, anything to avoid the punches. But Gans picked him apart. By the 5th round, Connolly had no answer. He was finished, and the referee stopped it. Gans defended his title again and again against names like Steve Crosby, Gus Gardner, Kid McPartland, and even a man he first lost to, Frank Earn. One by one, they fell. Then came the showdown in Goldfield, Nevada. September 3, 1906. Gans took on the tough and rugged Oscar, battling Nelson in a brutal 42-round war. That's not a typo, 42 rounds. It was one of the biggest fights ever held at the time, set up by famous promoter Tex Rickard. And Gans came out on top. But things weren't always fair for him. In 1905, he fought Mike Twin Sullivan to a draw decision many thought Gans should have won. He settled in their next 3 fights, knocking Sullivan out each time, even though Sullivan was the bigger man. Gans was only about 134 pounds going in, but he used speed, brains, and sharp punches to break Sullivan down. He walked away with a hefty paycheck and another win in the books. As great as he was, Gans didn't get treated fairly. When he faced battling Nelson again in 1908, everything was stacked against him. Nelson's team made sure Gans had to weigh in fully dressed. No other champion would have had to do that. Worse still, Gans was sick. He was already dying from tuberculosis. And yet, he still went through with the fight. He lost that bout, and the rematch too. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because his body was giving out. Joe Gans passed away less than 2 years later. But what he left behind wasn't just wins or titles. He showed what it meant to fight when the world wanted you to quit. And in doing so, he opened the door for every black fighter who came after him. On September 30th, 1904, 2 of the toughest fighters of their time stepped into the ring, Joe Gans and Barbados Joe Walcott. It was set for 20 rounds, and that's exactly what the crowd got. 20 long, hard rounds of war. From the 4th round on, Walcott fought with one arm. He'd torn something in his left and couldn't use it at all. But he kept coming, swinging, pushing forward. The referee gave 7 rounds to Gans, 5 to Walcott, and called 8 of them even. He said Gans was slick, sharp with his punches, but Walcott never stopped coming. There was no title on the line that night, just pride. And both men gave everything they had. Not long after that fight, Walcott accidentally shot himself in the hand. He wouldn't fight again for more than a year. Gans kept going, but his body was already starting to break down. On August 10th, 1910, at just 35 years old, Joe Gans died of tuberculosis. He was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery, back home in Baltimore. His grave sits near the entrance, marked by a stone paid for and cared for by the International Boxing Commission. On that stone, Gans left his own words. "I was born in the city of Baltimore in the year 1874, and it might be well to state at this time that my right name is Joseph Gant, not Gans. However, when I became an object of newspaper publicity, some reporter made a mistake and my name appeared as Joe Gans. And as Joe Gans it remained ever since. It was a small mistake, but that name, Joe Gans, would go down in history." By the time he hung up his gloves, Gans had racked up 145 wins, 100 of them by knockout. He'd only lost 10 times, with dozens of draws and no decisions, many from an era when fights were judged by newspapers. Still, when people watched him fight, they knew what they were seeing. A master. In 1990, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Today, a bronze statue of Joe Gans stands inside Madison Square Garden. It used to be near the locker rooms. Fighters would tap his left fist before stepping out to fight, hoping a bit of Gans' magic might rub off on them. Out in Goldfield, Nevada, where Gans fought battling Nelson in a grueling 42-round battle back in 1906, there's a memorial that still stands on the exact spot where they fought. That fight wasn't just about boxing, it was about respect, survival, and something more. Joe Gans wasn't just the first African American to win a lightweight world title. He was the first African American to win any world boxing title. At a time when the country was full of lines you weren't supposed to cross, Gans crossed them and stood tall. One boxing historian once said that Joe Gans didn't just fight in the ring, he showed, through his hands and his heart, what people had only talked about. While preachers gave speeches and newspapers called for justice, Gans let his fists do the talking. Over a century later, on November 25, 2024, Maryland Governor Wes Moore and Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott made it official. That day would be known as Joe Gans Day. A day to remember the fighter who started with nothing, changed everything, and never got the credit he truly deserved. Joe Gans didn't talk much, but he didn't have to. He let his hands speak for him. In a time when the world tried to shut him out, he stepped through the ropes and showed what was possible. He wasn't just a champion in the ring, he was a quiet storm who changed the game without ever needing the spotlight. Long before boxing had pay-per-view, big arenas, and global fame, there was Joe Gans fighting smart, fighting hard, and fighting for something bigger than himself. Today, his name may not be shouted as loud as some others, but if you know boxing, really know it, you know Joe Gans is where the story of greatness begins.